3 weeks had passed since Emma's arrival in Cedar Ridge, and the small cabin on her homestead was finally taking shape. With the help of the Kowalski family and a few other supporters from town, she had managed to raise the walls and complete the roof despite several mysterious setbacks that had the clear fingerprints of Marcus Kane's interference. Emma stood in the doorway of her new home, watching James hammer the final shingles into place. The sight of him working in his shirt sleeves, his dark hair damp with perspiration and his strong hands moving with practiced precision, made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with the physical exertion of building. Their courtship had progressed slowly but steadily over the past weeks. James had been true to his word about respecting her independence, never trying to take over her decisions or treat her as helpless. Instead, he had become her most trusted advisor and closest friend, offering medical knowledge when she worried about the health of her newly purchased livestock, helping her plan the most efficient layout for her farm, and simply being present when she needed someone to talk through the challenges she faced. That should hold against any weather the territory can throw at us, James said, climbing down from the ladder. You've got yourself a fine little house, Emma. The cabin was small but well-built, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a separate bedroom, and a loft for storage. Emma had insisted on including several windows to let in light, despite warnings from some townspeople that glass was expensive and easy to break. She refused to live in darkness to save money or avoid the risk of damage from Kane's sabotage attempts. I can hardly believe it's really mine, Emma said, running her hand along the smooth wood of the doorframe. For the first time in my life, I have a home that belongs to me and no one else. James stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. How does it feel? Terrifying and wonderful at the same time. Over the past weeks, Emma had discovered that James was unlike any man she had ever known. He listened to her opinions without trying to change them, valued her intelligence, and never made her feel that her dreams were foolish or inappropriate. When she talked about her plans to expand her farm or perhaps start a small business selling vegetables to the town, he offered practical advice and encouragement rather than lectures about the proper role of women. Emma, James said softly, there's something I need to tell you. His serious tone made her look up sharply. What is it? Kane came to see me yesterday. He offered me $5,000 to convince you to sell your claim and leave town. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. What did you tell him? I told him exactly what he could do with his money, though I used more polite language. James's jaw tightened. But, Emma, I'm worried. $5,000 is an enormous sum, and the fact that he's willing to pay it suggests he's getting desperate. Desperate men do dangerous things. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the horizon. A group of 6 riders was heading toward the cabin at a fast pace, and Emma's heart sank as she recognized Kane in the lead. Get inside, James said quietly, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. No, Emma replied, moving to stand beside him. This is my land and my home. I won't hide from him. Kane and his men reined in their horses about 30 feet from the cabin. Emma noticed that all 6 men were armed, and their expressions were grim. This was no longer a business negotiation or a social call. Miss Patterson, Kane called out, I see you've managed to build yourself a little house. That's quite an accomplishment for a woman alone. Thank you, Emma replied, keeping her voice steady. I had help from my friends and neighbors. Kane's gaze moved to James. Dr. Whitfield, I'm disappointed to see you here. I thought you were a man of better judgment. My judgment is just fine, Kane, James replied. What do you want? I want to make Miss Patterson one final offer. I'll pay her twice what she invested in this land, plus enough money to return east and set herself up comfortably there. All she has to do is sign over her claim and be on the next stage out of town. And if I refuse? Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. Kane's expression turned cold. Then, I'm afraid there might be an unfortunate accident. Cabin fires are common on the frontier, especially in homes built by inexperienced settlers who don't understand proper safety precautions. The threat was clear and unmistakable. Emma felt anger surge through her, stronger than her fear. She had worked too hard and come too far to be intimidated by a bully, no matter how powerful he might be. Mr. Kane, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the distance between them. I have a counteroffer for you. Kane looked surprised. A counteroffer? Yes. You can take your threats and your money and leave my land immediately, or I'll file a complaint with the territorial authorities about your attempts to defraud me of my legal claim. I may also write some letters to newspapers back east about the lawless conditions in Cedar Ridge and the man who thinks he owns this entire territory. Kane's face flushed red with anger. You foolish woman. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? A man who's so insecure about his position that he's threatened by one woman with a homestead claim? Emma shot back. A man who's built his empire on intimidation and illegal tactics because he lacks the character to succeed through honest work. The silence that followed her words was deafening. Emma could see Kane's men exchanging glances, and she sensed that some of them were uncomfortable with the situation. This was no longer about business or even territory. It had become a personal battle of wills. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life, Kane said quietly, his voice filled with menace. I gave you every opportunity to leave peacefully. As Kane and his men wheeled their horses around and rode away, James turned to Emma with a mixture of admiration and concern. Emma, that was incredibly brave, but you've just painted a target on yourself. Kane won't let this go. Then, we'll have to be ready for him. Emma's voice was steady, but inside she was shaking. She had just committed herself to a fight that could cost her everything, including her life. That night, James insisted on staying at the cabin. He bedded down in the main room with his rifle within easy reach, while Emma lay awake in her new bedroom listening to every sound outside. She had expected to spend her first night in her own home celebrating her achievement, but instead she was preparing for what might be a fight for survival. Emma must have finally dozed off near dawn, because she was awakened by the sound of James moving around in the kitchen area. The smell of coffee and bacon drew her from her bed, and she found him preparing breakfast over her new stove. Good morning, he said with a smile that made her heart flutter despite their precarious situation. I hope you don't mind that I made myself at home in your kitchen. I don't mind at all, Emma replied, and she meant it. Having James in her home felt natural and right, as if he belonged there. The thought surprised her with its intensity. As they ate breakfast, Emma found herself studying James's face in the morning light. Over the past weeks, her feelings for him had deepened from attraction to something much stronger. She was falling in love with him, and the realization both thrilled and terrified her. James, she said carefully, what happens between us if I manage to keep my land and build a successful farm? James set down his coffee cup and looked at her seriously. What do you want to happen between us? Emma took a deep breath. I want to marry you, she said simply. But I also want to keep farming my land and running my own life. I don't want to become just another frontier wife who disappears into her husband's identity. Emma, I would never ask you to give up your dreams or your independence. If anything, I'd want to help you achieve them, even though that would mean having a wife who doesn't fit the traditional mold. James reached across the table and took her hand, especially because of that. Emma, I love your strength and your independence. I love that you're willing to fight for what you believe in. I don't want to change you. I want to build a life with you exactly as you are. Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. I love you too, James. But I'm scared that if we marry, society will expect me to become conventional, and eventually you might expect that too. Then, we'll have to prove society wrong, James said firmly. We'll show them that a marriage can be a partnership between equals. Before Emma could respond, they heard the sound of horses approaching again. This time, however, the riders were moving slowly, and Emma recognized Sarah Collins from the school, David Murphy from the general store, and several other townspeople she had met over the past weeks. James and Emma went outside to greet them, and Emma was surprised to see that the group included nearly 20 people, all carrying various supplies and tools. Miss Patterson, Sarah Collins said, dismounting from her horse. We heard about Kane's threats yesterday, and we've come to help. Help with what? Emma asked, confused. David Murphy stepped forward. We're going to help you defend your claim. Kane has been bullying people in this territory for too long, and it's time someone stood up to him. An older man named Thomas Reed, who Emma had met briefly at church, nodded his agreement. My wife and I came here 15 years ago with nothing but hope and determination. We built our ranch through honest work, and we won't stand by while Kane tries to drive off other hard-working settlers. Emma felt overwhelmed by the show of support. I appreciate this more than I can say, but I can't ask you to risk your safety for my fight. It's not just your fight anymore, Sarah Collins said. Kane's methods threaten all of us. If he can drive you off your legal claim, none of us are safe. Over the next several hours, Emma watched in amazement as her supporters organized a defense plan. Some of the men would take turns keeping watch around her property, while others would patrol the areas between her land and town. The women organized a communication system to spread warnings quickly if Kane made any moves against other settlers. James found Emma standing alone near her cabin, watching the activity with tears in her eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. "Nothing's wrong," Emma said, wiping her eyes. "It's just that for the first time since I left Boston, I feel like I truly belong somewhere. These people are willing to risk their safety to defend my right to be here. That's because they recognize something special when they see it," James said, putting his arms around her. "You've shown them that it's possible to stand up to tyranny and fight for what's right." As the sun set that evening, Emma's supporters began to head back to town, leaving a few men to keep watch through the night. Emma and James stood in the doorway of her cabin, looking out over the land she had fought so hard to claim. "James," Emma said quietly, "ask me again." "Ask you what?" "Ask me to marry you. Properly this time." James turned to face her, his expression serious but hopeful. "Emma Patterson, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner in sickness and in health, in success and in failure, for as long as we both shall live?" "Yes," Emma said, standing on her toes to kiss him softly. "But I have one condition." James raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "I want to keep my own name. I want to be Emma Patterson, not Mrs. James Whitfield." James smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As they kissed again, more passionately this time, Emma felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with her homestead or her fight against Kane. She had found not only her independence, but also her equal partner, a man who would stand beside her rather than try to control her. The next morning brought news that changed everything. David Murphy rode out to the cabin at dawn with word that Marcus Kane had been arrested by federal marshals on charges of fraud and intimidation related to illegal land deals throughout the territory. His empire, built on threats and violence, had finally collapsed when several of his victims found the courage to speak out. "It seems your threat to contact the territorial authorities got their attention," James told Emma as they watched Murphy ride away. "Kane's finished." Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. "Does this mean it's finally over?" "It means you're free to build the life you came here for," James replied. "We're free to build that life together." 6 months later, Emma Patterson and James Whitfield were married in a ceremony that scandalized some members of Cedar Ridge society and delighted others. Emma wore a simple blue dress and insisted on writing her own vows, promising to love and honor James, but notably leaving out any pledge to obey. James's vows included a promise to support Emma's dreams and goals as fully as his own. The reception was held on Emma's land, now expanded to include a larger house, a thriving vegetable garden, and a small herd of cattle. Emma had proven that a woman could successfully homestead on her own, and her farm had become one of the most productive in the area. As Emma and James danced to fiddle music under the Montana stars, surrounded by friends who had supported their unconventional courtship, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west seeking independence and had found something even more valuable, a love that enhanced rather than diminished her freedom. "Any regrets?" James whispered in her ear as they swayed to the music. Emma looked around at her land, her home, her friends, and, finally, at her husband, the man who had seen her strength and loved her for it rather than in spite of it. "None whatsoever," she said, pulling him closer. "This is exactly the life I dreamed of building." As the celebration continued around them, Emma and James knew they were writing a new story about what marriage could be on the frontier, a partnership between equals who chose to face life's challenges together while maintaining their individual dreams and identities. It was a story that would inspire other couples to question traditional roles and build relationships based on mutual respect and shared strength. Their frontier romance had indeed challenged every rule, and, in doing so, had created something entirely new and beautiful. Dawn came early to the Montana territory, and Emma was awake to greet it. She had always been an early riser, but excitement about seeing her new land made sleep impossible. After a hearty breakfast with Mrs. Henderson, she gathered her surveying tools and set out for Section 12. The walk to her property took nearly an hour, following a rough wagon trail that wound through grassland and scattered groves of cottonwood trees. When she finally reached the boundaries of her claim, Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. The land was even more beautiful than she had imagined from the surveyor's description. Rolling hills covered in thick grass stretched as far as she could see, dotted with wildflowers and intersected by the clear stream she had read about in the land records. The water bubbled over smooth stones and created small pools that reflected the morning sky. To the north, the land rose gradually toward the foothills of the mountains, while to the south it opened into a natural meadow perfect for crops. Emma pulled out her notebook and began sketching her plans. She would build her house on a slight rise overlooking the stream, with the barn and other outbuildings positioned to take advantage of the natural windbreaks provided by the trees. The fertile bottomland near the creek would be perfect for vegetables and grain, while the higher ground could support grazing for the livestock she hoped to acquire. She was so absorbed in her planning that she didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats until they were quite close. Looking up, she saw 3 riders approaching at a steady pace. Her heart sank as she recognized Marcus Kane in the lead, flanked by the same 2 men who had accompanied him to the land office. Kane reined in his horse about 20 feet away, and Emma noticed that all 3 men wore gun belts. She forced herself to remain calm and continued making notes in her book. "Miss Patterson," Kane said, his voice carrying a false friendliness. "I see you've come to look at your new property." "Good morning, Mr. Kane. I'm surveying the land and making plans for development." Kane dismounted and walked closer, his men remaining on their horses but positioning themselves to block her path back to town. Emma's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," Kane continued. "I realize I may have been too hasty in my approach. A lady like yourself deserves more consideration." "What kind of consideration?" Emma asked, not liking the direction this conversation was taking. "Well, I've done some investigating into your background. You're from a good family in Boston, educated, clearly intelligent. It seems a shame for someone with your qualities to waste away on a failing homestead." Emma bristled at his condescending tone. "I don't consider building a successful farm to be wasting away, Mr. Kane." Kane smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's where you're mistaken, Mississippi. This land won't support farming. The growing season is too short, the soil is too poor, and the winters are brutal. Within 2 years, you'll be bankrupt and desperate. Then, why are you so eager to acquire it?" Kane's smile faltered for a moment. "I'm trying to help you avoid a costly mistake. Tell me, Miss Patterson, what will you do when your money runs out? How will you survive when winter comes and you're alone out here with no help for miles?" Emma could hear the implied threat in his words. "I'll manage quite well, thank you." "I doubt that. But I have a proposal that might interest you. I'm in need of a woman with your education and refinement to help me run my household. My wife died 3 years ago, and I have business interests that require someone who can handle correspondence, manage accounts, and represent me in social situations. You could have a comfortable life, security, and a position of respect in the community." Emma stared at him in disbelief. "Are you offering me employment, Mr. Kane?" "I'm offering you much more than that. In time, if we found ourselves compatible, perhaps we could consider a more permanent arrangement." The full implications of his suggestion hit Emma like a physical blow. Marcus Kane was essentially proposing that she become his mistress, with the vague possibility of marriage if she proved satisfactory. The arrogance of the man was breathtaking. "I appreciate your offer, Mr. Kane, but I must decline. I came here to build my own life, not to serve in someone else's household." Kane's expression hardened. "You're making a serious error in judgment, Mississippi. I'm the most powerful man in this territory, and I could make your life very comfortable. Refuse me, and you'll find that survival out here is much more difficult than you imagine. Is that a threat? It's a reality. Accidents happen on the frontier. Equipment fails, supplies go missing, livestock wander off or get killed by predators. A woman alone has no protection against such misfortunes. Emma felt anger rising in her chest, but she also felt genuine fear. Cain was making it clear that he would use sabotage and intimidation to force her off her land. She thought of the gun in her wagon back in town and wished she had brought it with her. I understand perfectly, Mr. Cain. Thank you for making your position so clear. Cain mounted his horse again. I'll give you 1 week to reconsider my offer, Miss Patterson. After that, I'm afraid I can't be responsible for what might happen to an inexperienced homesteader trying to survive on her own. As the 3 men rode away, Emma sank down onto a fallen log and tried to steady her shaking hands. She had expected resistance to her homesteading efforts, but Cain's open threats went far beyond anything she had imagined. For the first time since leaving Boston, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The sound of a single horse approaching brought her head up sharply. Her relief was immense when she saw James Whitfield riding toward her on a bay mare. He dismounted quickly and approached with obvious concern. Emma, are you all right? I saw Cain and his men leaving, and you look upset. The use of her first name sent a warm feeling through her, and she realized they had moved beyond formal courtesy without either of them acknowledging it. I'm fine, she said, though her voice shook slightly. Mr. Cain made me a very generous offer to abandon my claim and become his housekeeper. When I declined, he explained the various misfortunes that might befall an inexperienced homesteader. James's jaw tightened. What exactly did he say? Emma repeated Cain's words as accurately as she could remember them. James listened with growing anger, his hands clenched into fists. That bastard, James muttered. I'm sorry, Emma, but Cain has gone too far this time. Has he done this before? He's driven off 3 other families in the past 2 years through various forms of intimidation and sabotage. The local sheriff is his cousin, so complaints to law enforcement are useless. Emma felt her heart sink. Then, what can I do? James sat down beside her on the log, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that seemed to surround him. You could leave, but I don't think that's what you want to hear. It's not. I won't be driven off by a bully, no matter how powerful he thinks he is. Then, we'll have to find another way to deal with him. Emma looked at James in surprise. James met her gaze directly. Emma, I want to help you succeed here. Cain's methods are wrong, and someone needs to stand up to him. But beyond that, He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. I find myself deeply concerned about your welfare. Emma felt her pulse quicken. James, you barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave enough to travel 2,000 miles alone to claim a new life. I know you're intelligent and determined. I know you stood up to Marcus Cain without backing down. And I know that you're unlike any woman I've ever met. They sat in silence for a moment, the tension between them shifting from fear to something else entirely. Emma found herself studying James's profile, noting the strong line of his jaw and the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar. Tell me about yourself, Emma said softly. How does a doctor end up in a frontier town like Cedar Ridge? James smiled, and Emma noticed how it transformed his entire face. It's not a very exciting story. I grew up in Pennsylvania, went to medical school in Philadelphia, and came west 5 years ago looking for adventure. I thought I'd stay for a year or 2, and then return east to establish a practice in a more civilized location. What changed your mind? The people here needed help, and I found that I enjoyed the challenge of frontier medicine. Back east, most of my patients would have been wealthy people with minor ailments. Here, I deliver babies, set broken bones, treat gunshot wounds, and deal with everything from snake bites to pneumonia. It's never boring. Do you ever regret staying? James looked at her with an expression that made her heart skip a beat. I did sometimes, until yesterday. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. James, I should tell you that I didn't come west looking for romance. I came here to prove that I could build a life on my own terms. I understand that, and I respect it. But, Emma, I hope you'll allow me to court you properly while you're building that life. I promise not to interfere with your independence or try to change your plans. Emma studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. She had learned to be wary of men who claimed to support her independence while secretly planning to control her. But James seemed genuine in his respect for her goals. I would like that, she said quietly. James smiled again, and Emma felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or anger. In that case, would you allow me to escort you to church on Sunday? It would be a good way for you to meet some of the other people in town, and it might help establish your reputation as a respectable member of the community. That sounds perfect. As they walked back toward town together, leading James's horse, Emma felt lighter than she had since her confrontation with Cain. Having an ally made all the difference, but having an ally who also made her pulse race whenever he looked at her was both thrilling and terrifying. James, she said as they reached the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, I need to purchase building supplies and equipment. Do you know anyone who might be willing to help me with the construction? There are several men in town who do carpentry work, but I should warn you that Cain's influence might make it difficult to find someone willing to take the job. What if I offered to pay above the usual rates? That might help. Let me think about who would be most likely to stand up to pressure from Cain. James paused thoughtfully. Actually, there's a family called the Kowalskis who live about 10 miles south of town. They're Polish immigrants who came here 2 years ago and have been struggling to get established. Cain has already tried to drive them off once, so they have no love for him. They might be willing to help you in exchange for fair wages. Can you introduce me to them? I'd be happy to. In fact, why don't I drive out there with you tomorrow? It would give us a chance to discuss your building plans, and you could meet the family. Emma agreed, and as they parted ways in front of Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow with an anticipation that had nothing to do with construction plans. That evening, Emma joined Mrs. Henderson for dinner and was surprised to find 2 other guests at the table. One was a middle-aged woman named Sarah Collins who ran the town's small school, and the other was a young man named David Murphy who worked as a clerk in the general store. Miss Patterson, Mrs. Henderson said as they sat down to a meal of roast chicken and vegetables. I thought you might enjoy meeting some of the other residents of Cedar Ridge. Sarah Collins was a pleasant woman in her 40s who had come west after her husband died in the Civil War. She was well-educated and clearly curious about Emma's plans. I understand you're planning to farm your homestead, Sarah said. That's quite ambitious for someone working alone. I'm hoping to find help when I need it, Emma replied. I'm not afraid of hard work. David Murphy, who couldn't have been more than 20, looked at Emma with obvious admiration. Miss Patterson, if you need any help with supplies or equipment, I'd be happy to assist you. My family owns Murphy's General Store, and we believe in fair dealing with all our customers. Emma smiled gratefully. Thank you, Mr. Murphy. I'll definitely need to make some substantial purchases soon. As the conversation continued, Emma began to feel more optimistic about her chances of success in Cedar Ridge. Not everyone in town was under Marcus Cain's influence, and she was beginning to find the allies she would need. After dinner, she sat in her room writing a letter to her sister back in Boston. She described the journey west, her new land, and her plans for the future. But she found herself reluctant to mention either Marcus Cain's threats or her growing attraction to James Whitfield. Some things were too complex to explain in a letter. As she prepared for bed, Emma thought about the day's events. Cain's threats were serious, and she would need to be careful. But she also felt a growing sense of excitement about the future. For the first time in her life, she was truly free to make her own choices and build her own destiny. And if that destiny happened to include a certain handsome doctor who treated her as an equal, well, that was a complication she was willing to explore. The wagon wheels creaked against the rough terrain as Emma Patterson adjusted her grip on the leather reins. Dust clouds swirled around the convoy of settlers heading toward the Montana Territory in the summer of 1887. She had never imagined that leaving her comfortable life in Boston would lead to this moment. But here she was, 23 years old, and determined to claim her own piece of land under the new Homestead Act. Emma's father had been furious when she announced her plans. Ladies of proper breeding did not venture into the wilderness alone, he had thundered. They married well, managed households, and bore children within the safety of civilized society. But Emma had always been different. She could read and write better than most men, had studied agriculture and farming techniques in secret, and possessed a stubborn streak that her mother claimed came from her Irish grandmother. The wagon train consisted of 47 people, including 12 families, several single men seeking fortune, and Emma herself as the only unmarried woman traveling alone. The wagon master, a grizzled man named Tom Bradley, had initially refused to let her join. It was only after she proved she could handle a rifle, drive a wagon, and had enough money to pay her way that he reluctantly agreed. "Keep to yourself and don't cause trouble," Bradley had warned her. "These frontier towns ain't kind to women who don't know their place." As the convoy approached the small settlement of Cedar Ridge, Emma caught her first glimpse of what would be her new home. The town consisted of a main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a small church, and perhaps 30 houses scattered around the outskirts. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the warm summer weather. The wagon train came to a halt near the town's edge, and people began gathering their belongings. Emma climbed down from her wagon, her legs stiff from the long journey. She wore practical clothing, a simple brown dress, sturdy boots, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect her face from the sun. Her long auburn hair was braided and pinned back, and her green eyes took in every detail of her surroundings. "Miss Patterson?" A voice called out behind her. Emma turned to see a tall man approaching. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with dark hair, weathered skin, and intelligent brown eyes. He wore clean but well-worn clothes, dark pants, a white shirt, and a simple vest. Unlike many of the men she had encountered on the trail, he had shaved recently and carried himself with quiet confidence. "I'm Dr. James Whitfield," he said, extending his hand. "I heard from Tom Bradley that you might need assistance getting settled. I run the medical practice here in town." Emma shook his hand, surprised by the firmness of his grip and the calluses on his palms. Most doctors she knew in Boston had soft hands from a life of comfort. "Thank you, Dr. Whitfield. I'm planning to file a claim for land outside of town. I understand there's a land office here." James nodded, but his expression grew concerned. "There is, but I should warn you. The local ranchers aren't particularly welcoming to new settlers, especially those looking to farm. And a woman claiming land on her own." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Well, it's not something that's been done around here before." "Then, I suppose I'll be the first," Emma replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had expected resistance, but she hadn't traveled 2,000 miles to give up at the first sign of difficulty. James studied her for a moment, and Emma found herself doing the same to him. There was something different about this man compared to the others she had met on the journey. He seemed educated, thoughtful, and genuinely concerned for her welfare rather than simply dismissive of her capabilities. "The land office is run by Samuel Morrison," James continued. "He's a fair man, but he's under pressure from some of the larger ranchers in the area, particularly Marcus Kane, who owns the biggest spread around here. Kane has been trying to expand his holdings, and he's not happy about new settlers taking up land he considers his." Emma's jaw tightened. "The land belongs to the government until it's properly claimed. I have as much right as anyone else." "You do," James agreed. "But legal rights and practical realities don't always align out here. Would you like me to accompany you to the land office? It might help to have someone local vouch for your intentions." Emma considered the offer. She prided herself on her independence, but she also recognized the value of having an ally in this new place. Dr. Whitfield seemed genuine in his concern, and his offer appeared to come from helpfulness rather than any attempt to control or manipulate her. "I would appreciate that, thank you." As they walked toward the center of town, Emma became aware of the attention they were drawing. Women peered from windows, men stopped their conversations to stare, and children followed at a distance. She kept her chin up and her stride confident, but she could feel the weight of their curiosity and judgment. The land office was a small building next to the general store. Samuel Morrison was a thin man in his 50s with graying hair and wire-rimmed spectacles. He looked up from his paperwork as they entered, his eyes moving between Emma and James with obvious surprise. "Dr. Whitfield," Morrison said, rising from his chair. What brings you by today? Samuel, I'd like you to meet Miss Emma Patterson. She's just arrived with the wagon train and is interested in filing a homestead claim. Morrison's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. A homestead claim? Miss, are you married? Do you have a husband or father with you? I'm unmarried and traveling alone, Emma replied. I understand that single women are permitted to file claims under the Homestead Act. Well, yes, technically that's true, Morrison said, adjusting his spectacles nervously. But, Miss Patterson, you must understand that farming out here is incredibly difficult work. The winters are harsh, the growing season is short, and there are constant challenges with weather, animals, and... He glanced toward the window. Other complications. I'm prepared for hard work, Emma said firmly. I've studied farming techniques. I have enough money to purchase necessary equipment and supplies, and I'm not easily discouraged. Morrison looked to James, who nodded encouragingly. Miss Patterson seems quite determined and well-prepared, Samuel. I think she deserves the same opportunity as any other settler. Before Morrison could respond, the door to the land office burst open. A large man in expensive clothes strode in, followed by two other men who had the look of hired hands. The newcomer was in his 40s, with graying hair, a well-groomed mustache, and cold blue eyes that immediately fixed on Emma. Morrison, the man said, ignoring both Emma and James. I heard there was someone here trying to file a claim on Section 12. Mr. Kane, Morrison said, his voice suddenly nervous. This is Miss Patterson. She's just arrived and is interested in homesteading. Marcus Kane turned his attention to Emma, looking her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. Miss Patterson, he said with mock politeness. I'm Marcus Kane. I own the largest ranch in this area, and I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. What sort of misunderstanding? Emma asked, keeping her voice level despite the tension in the room. Section 12 borders my land, and I've been planning to expand my operation there. It's not suitable for farming. The soil is poor and the water rights are complicated. You'd be wasting your time and money. Emma had studied the available land carefully before making her choice. Section 12 was 160 acres of good grassland with a small stream running through it, perfect for both grazing and farming. Kane's claim about poor soil was clearly false. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Kane, but I've done my research. I believe the land will suit my purposes quite well. Kane's expression hardened. Miss, I don't think you understand how things work around here. This is rough country, and it's no place for a woman alone. You'd be much better off returning to wherever you came from. James stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between Emma and Kane. Mr. Kane, Miss Patterson has every right to file a claim if she chooses to do so. Kane's cold gaze shifted to James. Dr. Whitfield, I'm surprised to see you involving yourself in this matter. I thought you were a man of sense. I believe in fairness and following the law, James replied calmly. The Homestead Act doesn't discriminate based on gender. The law and common sense are two different things, Kane said, his voice taking on a threatening edge. Miss Patterson, I'm going to make you an offer out of the goodness of my heart. I'll pay for your passage back east and throw in an extra $100 for your trouble. That's more than generous. Emma felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Kane, but I'm not interested. I came here to make a new life for myself, and that's exactly what I intend to do. Kane's jaw clenched. You're making a mistake, Mississippi. A big mistake. He turned and stalked out of the office, followed by his men. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Morrison sat back down heavily in his chair. Miss Patterson, perhaps you should reconsider. Marcus Kane is a powerful man, and he's not accustomed to being refused. Is he more powerful than the United States government? Emma asked. Because that's who grants homestead claims, not Mr. Kane. Morrison sighed and pulled out the necessary paperwork. Very well. You'll need to prove up the land within 5 years. That means building a dwelling, farming at least 10% of the acreage, and living on the property for a significant portion of each year. You understand the requirements. I do. As Emma filled out the paperwork, she was acutely aware of James watching her. When she finished signing the documents, Morrison stamped them officially and handed her a copy. Congratulations, Miss Patterson. You now own 160 acres in the Montana Territory. God help you. Outside the land office, Emma found herself alone with James. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street, and she could see people continuing to watch them from doorways and windows. That was quite an introduction to Cedar Ridge, James said with a wry smile. Marcus Kane doesn't usually show his hand so quickly. I take it he's used to getting his way? Unfortunately, yes. He came here 15 years ago with money and ambition, and he's built his ranch through a combination of legitimate purchases and less savory methods. He's not above using intimidation or violence to get what he wants. Emma felt a chill despite the warm air. Are you trying to scare me into leaving, Dr. Whitfield? On the contrary, I'm trying to prepare you for what you're facing. But I also want you to know that not everyone in this town agrees with Kane's methods. There are good people here who believe in fairness and justice. Including you? James met her eyes directly. Including me. Emma felt something stir within her that had nothing to do with land claims or frontier challenges. There was something about James Whitfield that drew her, his quiet strength, his willingness to stand up for what was right, and the way he treated her as an equal rather than a curiosity or a problem to be solved. I need to purchase supplies and find temporary lodging until I can build something on my land, Emma said, forcing herself to focus on practical matters. Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house. She's a widow who could probably use the income, and she's one of the more accepting people in town. As for supplies, Patterson's General Store, no relation to you, I assume, has most of what you'll need. Thank you for all your help today. I don't know how I would have managed without it. It was my pleasure, James said, and Emma could tell he meant it. Miss Patterson, would you allow me to escort you to Mrs. Henderson's? It's getting late, and after your encounter with Kane, I'd feel better knowing you're safely settled for the night. Emma agreed, and as they walked through the quiet streets of Cedar Ridge, she found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. James Whitfield was unlike any man she had known in Boston. There was no pretension about him, no sense that he was performing or trying to impress her. He seemed genuinely concerned for her welfare, and she found his quiet confidence deeply attractive. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was a two-story white building with a wide front porch. The elderly woman who answered the door had kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Dr. Whitfield, she said warmly. How nice to see you. Mrs. Henderson, I'd like you to meet Miss Emma Patterson. She's just arrived in town and is looking for lodging. Mrs. Henderson looked Emma up and down, but her expression was curious rather than judgmental. Come in, dear. You must be the young woman who filed a homestead claim today. Word travels fast in a small town. As they entered the boarding house, Emma wondered what else word had traveled about her first day in Cedar Ridge. She had a feeling that her challenges were just beginning, but she also felt a spark of hope. She had found an ally in James Whitfield, and perhaps others who would support her right to build a life on her own terms. The boarding house was clean and comfortable, with simple furnishings and the smell of fresh bread coming from the kitchen. Mrs. Henderson showed Emma to a small but cozy room on the second floor. I can offer you room and board for $3 a week, Mrs. Henderson said. That includes breakfast and dinner, and I'll pack you a lunch if you're working out on your land. That's very reasonable. Thank you. After Mrs. Henderson left, Emma sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked out the window at the mountains in the distance. She had done it. She had officially claimed her own piece of the American frontier. Tomorrow, she would begin the real work of building her new life. As she prepared for bed that night, Emma's thoughts kept returning to Dr. James Whitfield. She had not come west looking for romance, but there was something about him that intrigued her. He had treated her with respect and kindness, and she sensed that he saw her as more than just a curiosity or a problem to be solved. Little did she know that just across town, James was having similar thoughts about her. He had been impressed by her courage in facing down Marcus Kane, and her determination to pursue her dreams despite the obstacles ahead. Emma Patterson was unlike any woman he had ever met, and he found himself looking forward to seeing her again. Neither of them could have predicted how their lives would become intertwined in the days ahead, or how their growing attraction would challenge the established order of Cedar Ridge in ways that would test both their resolve and their hearts.